Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Cavert, and I'll be the moderator for this Waterfowl meeting. Stephanie is assisting with technical assistance, and if at any point during the meeting you need help using WebEx, please call 518-402-8005, and we will try to assist getting you connected. To reiterate, some housekeeping things to mention are everyone will be muted during the entirety of this meeting. If you have a question, please use the question and answer box located at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. Panelists will be able to answer your questions throughout this entire webinar. Please make sure that you are selecting all panelist options in the Q&A so that a panelist who is not speaking can answer your question faster. Questions that we received before the webinar were built into this presentation. If for some reason your question hasn't been answered, feel free to ask again in the Q&A box. We will try to respond to all questions to the best of our ability. If for some reason your question is not answered this evening, or if you have future comments or concerns, please reach out to the wildlife email at wildlife@dec.ny.gov. All right, so let's get started. Our panelists tonight are Josh Stiller, who oversees the small game program, including Waterfowl for New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Josh works out of our Albany office and will be providing updates on DEC's Waterfowl Research Program, recent waterfowl hunter surveys, and season dates. We also have Christina Ho, wildlife biologist at Region 8 Northern Montezuma office, who will be presenting on land acquisitions and habitat restoration projects, important waterfowl to conservation in New York. And we also have Tom Bell, wildlife biologist from Region 7 Cortland office, helping out with questions and answers. I'll reiterate again, if you're having any WebEx technical difficulties, please call 518-402-8005. All right, Josh, all you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Let me just get my screen up and we will get going here. Just this paper. All right, Katie, can you just let me know that you all can see my screen and we're good to go?
Yep, I can see it. You're good to go.
All righty. So yeah, my goal here is to just give you some updates on things that are happening in New York State and throughout North America related to waterfowl management and kind of the status of many different populations that we harvest here in New York. All right, we'll start out with just, as you guys know, in order to hunt migratory birds, and that includes a lot of different species, not just ducks, you need to be registered for HIP every year. So it's really important that you register. We've tried to make the process a lot easier. We have both an automated system and also a website you can go to and you can register. And really, the important part about this is the Harvest Information Program is how we estimate how many duck hunters we have, how many, because there's no specific license or anything like that, so we have to estimate how many we have. So how we do that is we send you surveys, and it's really important that we get participation in these so that we can really manage waterfowl in a meaningful way and have good data so that, you know, we can have liberal seasons when we have the opportunity, when we have the data to support it. So you may get a survey from the Fish and Wildlife Service. You may have noticed that they got rid of the paper diary, so all of it is online. So it's really important when you register for HIP and when you buy your hunting license from the New York State DEC that you give us a valid email address, or there's no way for us to reach us, so we can't survey you in these harvest surveys. And beyond harvest surveys, as many of you may know, we also do surveys that are just about you know, what your opinions are. So what do you want to see out of duck seasons? What do you want to see out of goose seasons? The only way to get these surveys is if you register for HIP, you have a New York State hunting license, and you give us a valid email address, because we can't reach you if we don't have good contact information. So you can go into your user profile on our licensing system and just make sure that your information is up to date and accurate, and you'll get surveys like this. So this is a recent survey that went out. I will note that this is where it comes from. It comes from, you know, it'll say NYS DEC Wildlife, but it's going to be from this qemailserver.com. So if you ever get one of these and you're wondering if it's valid, you can always call our wildlife office, and, you know, we're happy to answer any questions and let you know that this is, you know, a valid survey from DEC. So we know people are skeptical of online surveys, but you know, we try to do as much as we can to make it clear that this is an official survey. We try to make the surveys very short so that you can enter them in a reasonable amount of time. You know, we don't really have surveys that should take any any more than 10 minutes to complete, because we know your time is really valuable and you can't sit there for hours going through it. So yeah, keep an eye out for these surveys. When we do our waterfowl surveys, we're usually surveying everyone who registered. In most cases, when we get into larger samples, like all license holders, we have to take random samples just because we can't survey 500,000 people. But for waterfowl, luckily we have smaller numbers, so we can survey most, if not everybody. Some other changes for this year is that we now have a full electronic stamp. And that means that it's actually you can purchase it straight from the Fish and Wildlife Service at duckstamp.com. In the past, you could purchase stamps there, but they weren't valid for hunting. But now, actually, those will, as of this year, be valid for hunting. And so, starting July 1st, you can purchase those at duckstamp.com. After July 1st, they'll include a barcode or a printable receipt that is your proof of purchasing a duck stamp that you will furnish to law enforcement. So those are valid duck stamps. You will get an actual stamp after the hunting season, but it's not going to come until, I think I got mine in March this year. But you no longer have to go to another state agency to purchase it. Yeah, so the physical stamp will be mailed after March 10th of 2026. But that paper receipt or digital copy, so you can have it on your phone, you have to carry it at all times, just like you would your duck stamp before when you had the physical stamp. You'll still be able to purchase them at postal services, but the nice thing about this is if you forget, it's opening day and it's 4 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to leave the marsh and go find a post office that actually has some in stock. So this is a really big improvement. Really excited to see this happen. Another question that we got a lot before this webinar was, people telling us that it's really hard to find a waterfowl identification course. We definitely understand. As many of you know, we've been trying to do more and more online courses just because we know there's a void there where we can't find enough waterfowl ID instructors to have them in all parts of the state. So for those of you who don't know, the Waterfowl ID course is not a mandatory course, but for a lot of places like wildlife refuges, some state parks properties, and even a couple of New York State DEC properties, it may be required. So it is a challenging course. It is not like some of our other ones that are more common sense and safety related. This is helping you try to identify birds on the wing. The QR code there, if you follow that, there'll be a lot of QR codes throughout this, so feel free to take a snapshot with your phone, or send us a question or an email. We can get you a link to where you need to go. But that'll take you right to where there are courses available. They're typically more available, late summer is typically when a lot of these are hosted, and we will definitely be doing more online courses as we get closer. And so we know the struggle is real for a lot of hunters. This is a real challenge, especially if you're going out a couple times a year. There's a lot of different duck species that come through New York, and there's a lot of hens that look very similar to one another, especially. And early on in the season, even the drakes can look similar. And so this is something that biologists, both in New York State and throughout North America, are really working hard to look at ways that we can make it easier for hunters, whether that's through simplification of regulations. And more recently, we had a really neat experiment that's been going on in both Nebraska and South Dakota, and it's called the two-tier system. And so what it does is you have your standard traditional bag that a hunter can select, where they get all the different species and sex restrictions, and it's a 6-bird bag limit. And so to squeeze out a few extra ducks, we have all these different restrictions, like no more than 1 pintail or no more than 2 canvasbacks. In the tier 2 option, which when someone's registering for HIP, they would select either tier 1 or tier 2, and they'd be in that tier for the whole season. That tier 2 option is a fixed 3-bird duck bag limit, but it's any 3 ducks that are legal to harvest. So I mean, if it's a closed season like a harlequin, it's still closed, but basically it eliminates a lot of that concern that we get from newer hunters or people whose eyesight isn't as great as it once was. They really appreciate this option so that they don't have to be as concerned that they're going to make a mistake in the field. And the reality is, during the course of a hunting season, the average duck hunter shoots 6 ducks in a season. So most folks aren't taking advantage of the full 6 duck bag limit, but this gives them an option where they don't have to be as concerned when they're out there in the field. So really what the purpose of this is we're trying to keep duck hunters as long as possible and recruit new duck hunters. So we want to remove that barrier that we know is a barrier. We know that it's intimidating to go out duck hunting for the first couple of times, especially if you don't have someone there to mentor you. And so it helps assure that we continue to have waterfowl hunting and waterfowl hunters in the future. One of the concerns that come with this and why it's an experiment and not something that's just blanketly adopted is that obviously we have species that have more restrictive bag limits than 3 per day. So we're trying to see how many people take part in this 2-tier. We're trying to understand what the implications are for harvest management and know how much it increases or doesn't increase harvest of ducks in general. Especially species like black duck, species like canvasback, species like pintails. Those are all the things that we're trying to understand how a system like this might impact it. And we want to understand how it's going to impact our cost to monitor, because it makes it more complex for managers, less complex for hunters, which is fine, but we got to make sure it's not having negative impact. So this is something I really just want to bring up, as we as a management community are constantly looking for ways that we can be innovative and look for ways to recruit new hunters and remove barriers that we know exist that stop people from going out duck hunting for the first time or continuing it at some point. So those are some of the things we're doing to try and recruit new hunters. Some of the annual things that we do every year is we band an incredible number of migratory birds. You know, over 5,000 birds we banded in the last year. So this is both preseason and postseason. So before the hunting season and then after the hunting season ends, we banded about 2,000 geese, 2,000 mallards. And you can see the numbers there. So biologists put in an incredible amount of time, and really what this data does is it gives us information on harvest rates, gives us information on migration routes, and we're going to talk about a lot of this data throughout this presentation. And it really is, ducks are one of the most studied species that we have. We have just a huge wealth of data that helps us manage these species that go through multiple states and even countries, which makes it, it can make it a lot more challenging, but because we're able to work together with other states, we have these tremendous data sets that help us effectively manage birds and keep their populations robust. All right, another thing that we got a great deal of questions about in the lead up to this was about what's the status of avian influenza or high path avian influenza, so HPAI. So this slide is really busy, so I'll try to walk you through kind of what's going on. Let me see if I can pull up a pointer. Yeah, so it's not just in birds, so it's avian flu, but it can be in mammals. So you can see just in New York State, these are species that ended up dead. Obviously, some of these are captive animals, but we have had a bobcat and a couple other mammals here that have tested positive for high path avian influenza this winter or in the past year. When it really peaked was during the winter months, late winter months. We had a lot of bird movement both out of New York State and back into New York State as things started to warm up in February. So you can see we've had over 30 different species of birds test positive. A lot of Canada geese. High path avian influenza, I'm not one of our disease experts. We've got a lot of those that can give you a lot more information than I can, but high path avian influenza is one of those diseases that disproportionately affects different species. So something like a mallard is very likely to be a carrier of it, but it's very unlikely to die from it. They do die from it. You can see there we had 5 mortalities that we actually collected. Canada geese, much more susceptible to dying from this particular strain of the flu. Something like a pheasant or a chicken, it's nearly 100%. And as many of you are likely aware, a couple of years ago, we had it come through our game farm even. So, it wiped all the birds out really almost before we even had a chance to depopulate. So that's just something about high path avian influenza. Not all birds are affected evenly, and the problem with waterfowl is a lot of times they're carriers. So we've been asking the public, you might have seen, to report. So this map on the right is everywhere we've reported it. So the take-home message is all those yellow spots are all places that we've actually confirmed it. The reality is it's probably everywhere, and we just haven't maybe confirmed it in some of these places. So we know it's pretty much all over New York State. Any of those counties in orange, we've actually confirmed it within that county. So we have this form. If you find birds, I mean, I just had a report yesterday sent to me of someone with a video of a Canada goose in Fulton area, where it had a goose that was very clearly dying, likely from high-path avian influenza. But if you observe birds in your backyard or somewhere else, please do go to this website and fill the quick form out. We're not going to come out to every single event, but if it's in a place we haven't documented it, or if it's a high priority species, there's a lot of different factors we would consider, because we've been pretty overwhelmed at times with the number of reports for the public, but it's super important for us to understand the distribution and the number of different species that are impacted by it. So please do fill that out if you happen to see some birds, or contact your local wildlife office if you have questions about whether or not this is something you should report if you see sick or injured wildlife, more so sick. And then lastly, another question that we got a fair bit of is, well, what should I know as a hunter? Like, how do I protect myself? Again, not a human health expert or even a wildlife health expert, but high-path avian influenza cases in humans to this point are rare. The symptoms have been typically been mild so far. That can always change. You know, it's an influenza virus, so it can reconfigure and change in how bad it is or how virulent it is. But the cases to date, I believe there's been over 65 in humans, mostly in dairy farmers, but it's been pretty mild. Some of the things that you can do as we get back to hunting season, you know, don't harvest birds that are clearly sick. So if you got a bird, you come out to your snow goose spread and there's a goose standing there that, you know, is shaking its head and can hardly stand up. Don't harvest that bird and then take it home. You know, just use smart decisions. Make sure that when you're cleaning birds, your dog isn't, you know, eating any of the parts that you're cutting off of it. Those are just common sense stuff to reduce your risk. You know, wear gloves, things like that when you're cleaning birds is probably the smartest way to handle it, to ensure you're not putting yourself at risk. All right. Now we're getting to the meat of the presentation. So these are some of the changes that are coming for the 2025-26 hunting season. As many of you have likely seen by now, the pintail bag limit will be increased from 1 per day to 3 per day, and the regular season Canada goose bag limit will be reduced to 1 per day in most of the upstate zones. So we're going to go through some of these changes and some of the background on why. So this year, we just implemented a new harvest strategy for northern pintails, and it has 5 main objectives. We want to ensure the long-term health and sustainability of pintail populations. I highlight that first real high peak from the 1950s. It's really important to know that we are not trying to get back to 10 million pintails, because that is probably a very unrealistic goal. We're just trying to make sure that we have pintails and meaningful populations of pintail in perpetuity. So we've got to have to balance the conservation of pintails with hunting opportunity over the long term. You know, we want to give people as much opportunity as possible without negatively impacting populations, but there's a lot of things that affect populations far beyond hunters. We want to keep seasons open, and we want to only close seasons when we absolutely have to, because the reality is ducks are very resilient. They reproduce very quickly and can rebound very quickly. So, you know, we don't want to be overly reactive to declines in population. So as long as the population is over 1.2 million birds, the season for pintails will remain open. We want to allow a 3-bird bag limit. So this is really important to like the Pacific Flyway and some of the central Mississippi flyways, where they shoot a lot more pintails than the Atlantic Flyway. And so they wanted to have that option in some years. However, in the Atlantic Flyway, we wanted a consistent bag limit. So we wanted to make sure that when the season was open, it was the same regardless of what the population was doing. You know, above a certain level, basically, it's open. And so that's where we landed. These are our 5 objectives. This is a national harvest strategy, so it involved the states working with states in other flyways and with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And so how we arrived at our bag limit for the Atlantic flyway is that we account for just 3.3% of the national pintail harvest. So in the grand scheme of things, we are pretty inconsequential. So with a 3-bird bag limit in the Atlantic flyway, we are going to have no meaningful impact on the continental northern pintail population. So the nice thing about it is it simplifies regulations because it's fixed. As long as it's open, it's 3. We're not going to have to bounce around between 1, 2, or 3. It's just going to be a static 3 or closed. And in order for it to get closed again, it has to be a very low number of pintails to where we would internationally be very concerned about the population. So hopefully we never get there, and we don't intend to. And it will only close if it's closed nationally. So all 4 flyways would be closed in order for pintails to be closed in the Atlantic flyway. So that's how we ended up with a 3. It does seem a little counterintuitive to a lot of folks, as you know, pintail numbers have never really rebounded, but really through the advancements in our modeling, we've learned that it's not hunting numbers for pintail specifically that are driving population. So we were able to have more harvest opportunity without negatively impacting the population. Okay, so geese, this is another one. We got a lot of questions about Canada geese. You know, why are our zone boundaries the way they are? It doesn't make any sense. I can shoot them over here, but I can't shoot them across the road. And so this is something that we've been struggling to explain for a long time. You know, it's something that is really inherently complex because although geese look the same, or Canada geese, all Canada geese look the same, they're not the same. Biologically speaking, they are very different birds. The birds that nest in New York, the birds that nest in southern Ontario have a completely different life history than birds that nest in northern Quebec and in these subarctic areas. These birds that go north and end up right over like along this coast, interior here, and along this coast here on Ungava, these birds take longer to sexually mature. So some of them aren't maturing until they're 3, 4, 5 years old. So they're not even attempting to breed for the first time. They have to live multiple years before they even attempt. Then once they do reproduce, their clutch sizes are smaller, so they lay fewer eggs, and they have years. They've had some years like 2018 where it was an abject failure. They basically did not reproduce, which was so they have this boom, more of a boom and bust type reproduction. Whereas our birds here in New York, a lot of them are reproducing at 2 to 3 years old. They have larger clutch sizes. Their survival, because they're not migrating unless they absolutely have to, because everything freezes, you know, they may just migrate a couple states south or 1 state south. You know, those birds are just way more productive because they're not under the same stressors that these northern Canadian birds are. And the reality is that this is an international effort to manage these species. And you have people that rely on these birds all the way through the flyway. So we have an obligation to manage them in that way to make sure that we're not negatively impacting these populations of migratory geese. And I should mention, there's actually 2 populations of migratory Canada geese that we manage. These ones on the Ungava Peninsula, and then in Newfoundland, Labrador, Prince Edward Island, these birds over here are called the North Atlantic population. So these North Atlantic population birds are the ones that we harvest almost exclusively in central and eastern Long Island. The ones that we harvest in upstate New York primarily are these ones that are in central Quebec. All right, so just more demonstrating just how different these birds are. This left graph are birds that are nesting. These are population estimates of birds that are nesting in New York. So you can see from 92 to about 2006 or so, we had a steady increase. And then from there on, it's been pretty stable. It fluctuates somewhere between 250,000 to 350,000. Somewhere in that ballpark is about how many resident Canada geese we have. And that's the total number of birds, including non-breeders. This number on the right here, this graph on the right, these are those Atlantic population birds. So those interior birds, I'm going to mostly focus on the Atlantic population and not so much the North Atlantic population, because the North Atlantic population regulations haven't changed in a while. So they've been pretty static. So we'll focus on the one that's been fluctuating a lot lately. So these are their population estimates. We're only counting breeding birds here. So you can see we've got about 100 to 150,000 breeding pairs. So that's about, 200 to 300,000 total adult AP geese that we're managing. And so you can imagine we have the same number of migratory geese as we have just in New York State of resident geese. And we have resident geese all throughout, southern Ontario, all the way down through Maryland, and even a little bit further south. So, this is a pretty small population that's pretty susceptible. You can see, if anybody remembers from the 90s, you remember the closed seasons. This is where we never want to get back to. So we are very reactive to try and keep us up here. We had a really good run here for a while where the population was doing well, it was stable. And then you can see we've had a number of years where it's not looking as great as it once was, and we have some gaps in data, which makes us even more inherently conservative, because we have some missing information, so we don't really know exactly where that population was during these years. So we're definitely more conservative. So, question I get a lot is, why is the zone drawn where it is? Why isn't it here? Why isn't it there? And what we're trying to do is provide as much opportunity as we can without negatively impacting these migratory geese. So what you're seeing in this map, each one of these dots represents a leg band recovery of an Atlantic population Canada goose during the regular hunting season. So this map on the right is showing the entire flyway. You can see the core area down here in the Delmarva. This is why they have a more restrictive bag limit whenever we're in anything outside of a restrictive package. They have a 2-bird bag limit when we have a 3-bird bag limit in the moderate and liberal. And then you can see kind of where they are in New York. On the right, this is just 3 years of data from 2015 to 17, I believe, if I'm remembering that right, somewhere in that ballpark. But you can see these gray areas are areas that we manage as migratory goose zones. You can see there's a little bit of miss where there's probably areas that, we're catching a few AP geese. And actually, as a result of this is why you saw us restrict the spring season in that southern zone. And that's because during that time of year, we were shooting AP geese in our RP areas. So there's Atlantic population migratory geese were being shot in the spring on their return in these areas that during the fall, they're not really migrating through. So like most species, there's a difference between their spring and fall migration routes. More recently, as I think a lot of folks are aware, we have a lot of these GPS Canada goose collars out there. We have over 550 of them, 600, somewhere in that ballpark right now. And this map on the left is showing those zones again, where we manage them. And then the darker the red, so it's blue to red, the darker the red, the more concentrated those points are. This is where those birds that have those collars are spending their time in New York. So get the question, why are the Finger Lakes so restrictive? Why is the St. Lawrence River Valley so restrictive? It's because that's where those migratory geese go by and large. And you can see they follow around, come down the Hudson, and that's why. So it's really nice to see the convergence of two data sets, and we have banding data from hunter harvested birds and our GPS data from birds that are still alive. So it's telling us where they are, and then it's telling us where they end up getting shot, because it's not just a matter of where are the birds, it's a matter of where are the birds when a season is open and when you have in places that you have hunters who are actually harvesting them. So really neat to see this data. This is all preliminary data that's on the screen there. We're in year 3 of that study. We're going to have many, many more years worth of data. We have a postdoc coming on in the next year or two that's going to be pumping out a lot of great work that's going to help us manage geese. And hopefully, we'll find some periods of time where maybe there's a little bit of wiggle room to provide more opportunity for the resident birds where we're not impacting these AP birds. So getting back to what's happening with their population and what's the harvest strategy right now, here's a map on the left of all the places that we survey. So all these lines are places that we fly fixed wing transects, where we're just flying over and we're counting how many pairs at a really low altitude, counting how many birds we see. And here are the lines showing, you can see this big decline that's happening here on the Hudson Bay coast. So about 80% of the entire population nests in this area. And you can see it's been a really precipitous decline in the pairs per square kilometer. This is not super surprising, because back here, as you recall a little bit ago, that's when we had a total failure. So now those birds are maturing and we're seeing this dip because there's a gap in the age class, where you have a bunch of what should have been breeders that just were never produced that year. So we're seeing this dip. And so our harvest strategy, just so folks know, like this isn't an arbitrary decision. We have a population model that spits out an estimate. So this year it estimated the population next year. So this spring, we got this estimate in the fall. It estimated that we were going to have 133,000 pairs. And so based on our harvest strategy, these are kind of the bins that we have. When the populations are between 60 and 125, it's a restrictive package. If it's between 125 and 160, it's a 30-day with a 3-bird bag limit in New York. And if it's over 160, that's where we get back to those really liberal options where you get 45 days and a 3-bird bag limit in New York and 2 in the Delmarva, as I was mentioning. However, so this is what, if we just based it solely on the population model, that's where we'd be. However, our concern is that we have those missing data inputs. So it makes us a little bit concerned about, you can see how the uncertainty is growing here. So the population is somewhere between here and here. If we're down here, that's really concerning. These black points, these are actual counts. So these are our actual population estimate. And you can see it's declining, even though the model is saying that it's pretty stable. And so this past summer on the breeding grounds, we had our lowest, our second lowest productivity estimate. So the number of juvenile birds banded per adult. So it was the lowest it's been, second lowest out of the last 20 years. So kind of that downward trend with the poor productivity this last year, we decided as a flyway that we should be conservative, just because, again, we don't want to get to here because it's a lot harder to recover once we get below 60,000. And our estimate, like the actual estimate from the survey, was 89,000. So that's the lowest estimate we've had for AP geese since 2001. And like I said, the productivity was very low, second lowest. And so the harvest strategy allows us that leeway to be more conservative than the population model suggests, when we have these other factors that are suggesting maybe AP geese are not doing as well as we think they are. So those are two of the big changes that are going on right now in the flyway and in New York State for this coming hunting season. And now we'll get into some of the more interesting stuff as far as I'm concerned. All right. So some of the research updates. As a lot of you know, we're doing a lot of research in New York State and throughout the Atlantic Flyway. We have, at this point, thousands of birds with transmitters and geolocators, which is this device here on the left, GPS transmitters, neck collars. There's a lot of birds with a lot of different markers. And we'll talk about that in detail on mallards in a second. But first, a number of you actually participated in this study and helped us out with a waterfowl contaminants project. So this was done in combination with Cornell University, New York State DEC, Pennsylvania Game Commission, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So it was a 4-state study. We took a semi-random or a strategic sample of birds to try to make it as representative as possible of birds across the landscape. You know, contaminants are kind of tough with migratory species. It's not like a fish where if you take them out of Schoharie Reservoir, I know that they were here. I know any contaminants they have are likely from this water body. Whereas a duck, you could have shot it in New York today, but it was 500 miles north of there, sitting below a contamination source. So it's a little harder to study them, but we wanted to look at ducks that people frequently harvest. So we worked with Cornell to sample mallards, green-winged teal, wood ducks, black ducks, and Canada geese. So these are the species that mostly are getting harvested in New York State and mostly consumed by hunters. So those are the species we looked at. We were looking at not only kind of the legacy contaminants, so you think things like dioxins, PCBs, mercury, and then we also wanted to look at some of the more contemporary things that, if you're in the Capital District, you probably hear a lot about PFOAs. And so we did a bunch of research. We collected those over 100 birds, this is really the first time we've done a reassessment of contaminant loads in waterfowl since the early 90s. We did a lot of work. So recently published a paper on this. If you're interested, it's there in the bottom left. You can check it out. It's pretty technical, but short answer is that, you know, we found contaminants in ducks. It's no surprise. We know there's some measurable level. I will preface this with, we are not the Department of Health, so the DEC does not give consumption advisories. I am not a human health expert again, but I can tell you that those descriptions on the right are what the Department of Health's current guidance is. So mergansers, eat none. All other waterfowl, up to 2 meals a month. And in general, just some tips for reducing exposure, things like wood ducks, Canada geese. Those are species that aren't consuming. Basically, it's very strongly tied to what types of food they're eating. So things that are eating a kind of omnivore type diet, you know, they're eating insects, they're eating vegetation, they're eating even fish, like mallards will even eat fish, depending on where they are. They'll eat like emerald shiners and stuff like that, or snails. Those species are going to have a little bit higher contaminant loads, whereas things like wood ducks, things like Canada geese, those are generally going to be lower. The other thing that you can do is remove all the fat before cooking, depending on the contaminant. And again, I encourage you to read up on this at the DOH guidance, and it's right there at that QR code. Those are things that you know, you can reduce exposure just by removing the fat and discarding stuffing and things of that nature. So just so you know, with this study, you know, this is step one. We already did another collection that you may have been part of. And that right now, that was done wholly within DEC. So we're getting the data from that. All this data then goes to the Department of Health, and then they go through a very rigorous process to determine what's the appropriate health advisory. So there may or may not be any changes to the health advisory, but we're probably a year or two away from any updates to this based on the data from these recent studies. All right, so this is a project that's very near and dear to my heart. Have a lot of, we've invested a lot in this study, both staff-wise and trying to deal with some of the decline that we're experiencing in eastern mallards, or the, you know, we've seen it in the Northeast US versus eastern Canada. So we started this, really this started about 6 years ago at this point, to lay all the groundwork for this study. But to date, we've marked over 2,500 mallards over the last 5 years with either GPS transmitters, which is on the back of that hen, and geolocators in the Atlantic Flyway and in eastern Canada. There's 22 collaborating agencies, and then you can see the numbers as of this April. We just finished our last field season of new devices. These are all the studies. The primary collaborators, so the PIs on the project, are myself, PA Game Commission, Mitch Wiegman from University of Saskatchewan, Jake Straub from SUNY Brockport, and John Calusi from Ducks Unlimited. And then we have a ton of people, more than 80 people are involved in this study and the field work associated with it. So it's just a monumental effort, but we're going to get more data on eastern mallards than we know what to do with. Well, we know what to do with it, but it's very exciting, just an incredible amount of data. So some of the primary questions that we're trying to answer right now are, how productive are eastern mallards? You know, in the prairie potholes, we've done a ton of research on mallards to understand their productivity and understand where they're more productive than other areas, to inform habitat management and stuff like that, what environmental variables they respond to. So that's why, and how we manage mid-continent mallards, we're using things like May ponds, because it informs how many we are able to harvest. So because we know what productivity is like in different habitat conditions. We don't really have that in the eastern North America. We've had some small scale studies, but nothing holistic like this. And then we're trying to get at these regional differences. So we know birds in eastern Canada are, or I guess the question is, are they reproducing at a higher rate than birds in the Northeast US? That's something we're trying to actually learn in a robust way. And if it is different, what's different about it? How does habitat affect mallard nest and brood success? What can land managers do to better support mallards? How does migration strategy affect mallards? So mallards are almost more similar to Canada geese in their migration strategies in the Atlantic flyway. We have these resident birds. I'm sure a lot of folks are aware. There's a lot of studies on genetics that it may influence how far a bird migrates and some other things about them. But we have these birds that don't migrate a long distance, and we have these birds that migrate all the way up to northern Canada. So does that affect how successful they are? Are birds that migrate farther north more successful? Are birds that stay local more successful? We don't know. We're going to find out. And then how has spring migration timing changed, and how does it potentially affect how we estimate surveys? There's no such thing as a perfect survey. We live in a very dynamic world where migration timing for the species that are migratory, especially, we can introduce bias into our surveys without intending to, because maybe we're looking at the wrong time. So these are all things that we're going to study, and a whole boatload more. These are just like really high level what we're going to learn from this study, but we're going to have just an incredible amount of data. So now for the more fun part. So before I start this graphic, I'm going to show you over here. It's showing you the date, and then you're going to see these birds migrate. So this is actually over 1,000 birds. Ignore the N775 because that's not actually the sample size. But this is showing all years. So each bird for each year, and you're going to see them. So this is where they started in July, June. We're getting into August. Then you're going to see the wave come down. Throughout November, they come into Southern Ontario. Throughout December, they're coming into New York. And then once you get into February, and you're back, sorry, it goes pretty quick. It's going to go through it again, but you can watch that wave again. Hopefully this is shown on your screen pretty clearly, but really neat to see the distribution. You can get an idea for the scale. Rarely do we have the ability to survey such a huge time span and such a huge spatial scale, so a huge area that we're looking at to see these mallards and understand what's going on all the way from South Carolina to the Maritimes of Canada. We're marking birds, and they're just going all over. So really neat data, and this is more just the fun stuff, not even the data that we're able to get out of it. So where do mallards nest? So these are actual breeding locations of mallards, and you can see our mallards that we mark in the wintertime in the Atlantic flyway, they go everywhere. But primarily, you see this cluster that's in Southern Ontario, Northern New York. You could just see there's a huge number of birds that are spending the summer time in here and then up through Ontario. So that's how we manage mallards. And what's nice to see is the vast majority of them are in places that we're currently counting them. We're not getting a lot of birds that are going way out here where we're not including those in our decision-making process. And so this is where they started in the wintertime, or sorry, in the summertime. That's where they nested. And then this is where they ended up the subsequent winter. And you can see how there's just complete mixing of these birds on the wintering grounds. You can see our these other birds are way over here, and why they don't end up in the same place is that what early on in our analysis, what it looks like is, wintertime, as you would expect, they don't have as much site fidelity. So they're not necessarily going back to the same areas. They're more likely to just go wherever conditions take them. They have a lot more fidelity to their breeding grounds than they do wintering grounds, but really neat stuff to see. So we have 3 all-star grad students on this. Actually, Daria here, she just accepted a position as a waterfowl biologist in another state. So that's awesome to see her move on. But she's just about working through her final analyses and going to defend her master's here soon. But she is looking at migration chronology and habitat use. So mallards are a really interesting one to try to classify seasons. You think about breeding season, wintering season. For something like greater white-fronted goose or a snow goose, it's really simple. When they're on the wintering grounds, you know where they are because it's where they end up, the farthest south pretty much that they go. That's their wintering spot. And then they end up breeding in the Arctic Circle. So, those birds are really obvious. For mallards, you have some birds that never leave a 30-mile circle, and then you have other birds that are going to James Bay from Maryland. So, really she's come up with this really complex rule set to understand where these birds, like what's their wintering range, and then look at habitat selection and use within that. And so she's hopefully going to be able to provide us with a lot of information on habitat requirements for mallards during the winter and during that migration. Next student I'll highlight is Abby Butler. She's another master's student at SUNY Brockport. These are both of these students are under Jake Straub there. And she's looking at the brood rearing season specifically. So this bottom right, if you can find the duck in there, good on you. She was using a UAV. She's got an optical lens on it. Also has a infrared, and so you can see really clearly there's a hen with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ducklings. And so she's going to all these wetlands, and we have a crew of other pilots that are going all around the Northeast. And so the bird has a transmitter on her back, so we know where she is approximately. We go find her, we count how many ducklings she has, and then we search for her periodically and track her to determine how many of them are actually successful. And then similar to a lot of the other students' work, we look at how habitat affects it, how dispersal distance, because mallards will move their brood anywhere from 1 to 6 miles and across some pretty treacherous places. So having ducklings is a very risky thing for both the hen and for the ducklings themselves. So that's what Abby's going to be focused on. Really cool stuff using UAVs to inform what ducks are doing and how successful they are. And then lastly, Cassidy just recently rolled up to a PhD program from a master's at the University of Saskatchewan. So she's still got a couple years left, but she's going to be the one to really tie all this stuff together. So pulling together these the breeding season, the wintering season, and then looking at how decisions made at different parts of the year affect ultimate success. So the bird surviving, the bird reproducing and having or successfully hatching a clutch, and then what leads to the successful one that actually has ducklings survive. So that's what she's going to be looking at. This is also a sister project with a black duck study where we have about 800 transmitters in the Atlantic Flyway and Mississippi Flyway actually on black ducks. So we have this really unique opportunity to look at mallards and black ducks in similar places and look at how they're using the landscape differently. The other cool thing she's doing, these squiggly lines that look like a bunch of gobbledygook, these are actually, it's called an accelerometer. So if you think about your phone and how your phone knows the orientation of it, when you're using it as a compass or whatever, well, all these devices have that in them. And based on this accelerometer data, we actually know if the bird is flying, if the bird's feeding, if the bird's preening, or if the bird's nesting or resting or nesting, or brood rearing. Like there's all these different, we use computer learning and it tells us what birds are doing. And then you tie that with what the habitats that bird's in, and you can make these really neat analyses. Whereas before we'd have to go and find birds and watch them and do these things called time activity budgets that were really complex, really time intensive. We can do this all from a computer and never go out there and see the bird, which is really amazing. And all this is verified because we actually have gone out and videotaped birds while collecting this data to make sure it aligns with the activity we think is actually happening. So she's got a really tall order in front of her to tie all this stuff together, but a lot of really great stuff that's going to really further our management of both mallards and black ducks in the Atlantic Flyway. Lastly, just make a pitch. This is not working right now, so just so you know, if you go to this map, hopefully it might even be working by now. Cassidy is working on trying to get that back up and running, but outside of the hunting season, we do post up the location data so people can see where these birds are, when they were in different places, and kind of follow along with migration. It's updated daily, so it's really neat stuff. So hopefully that'll be back up within the week. She's just trying to work out some of the coding that had failed in it. So if you want to check that out, please do. All right. And then lastly, I'm behind schedule, so I'll try to get through this stuff fairly quickly. Talk about both our duck season selection process and our goose season selection process. So I went over this for anyone who was at our fall webinar, but we'll go over duck seasons again. So it's a 3-year decision. We're in year 2 of those 3 years. And what we did was we developed a process by which we look at zone specific. So data from the Western zone is only data from the Western zone. We're not using data from other zones to inform what we do in the Western zone. So choosing zone specific migration data, abundance data for 15 species of ducks, and it's using hunter values and opinions from specifically hunters who, duck hunters who hunt that zone. In each of these zones, we considered up to 9 different date configurations. So, basically any combination of the season, from early seasons to late seasons to like super late seasons to different types of split configurations, 30-30 splits, 9 and 51, all kinds of different stuff. We consider trying to determine what best aligns with duck hunter values and the migration data. Remember when I was talking about HIP? The only way we can survey you and have you answer these surveys is if you give us a good email address. So if you tell me you didn't get the survey, almost every time that's happened, it's because either it was blocked by a spam filter, which unfortunately there's nothing we can do about that, or the person didn't register for HIP, which has happened more of the times than I'd like to say it has, or they didn't have a good email address. So anyways, we sent this out to HIP registrants from 2022-23 who said that they hunted ducks in the previous year. We got a 27% response rate, so really high response rate. In all of our zones, we had more than an adequate sample size to be confident in our responses, plus or minus 4%. In some places, even better precision than that, like the Northeast zone and the Western zone, where we got about 1,200 to 2,000 responses. So what did we ask duck hunters about? We asked them about, based on feedback that we got from hunters, was, what are the things that are important to you? And the things that hunters told us was most important to them was the opportunity to hunt when ducks are really important, or when they're really abundant, when they're migrating. This is something that I've had a lot of conversations about. What we're saying is when ducks are migrating is when they're coming in from other places. It's not necessarily when they're most abundant. There's that lead up period. So like if you're thinking about it like a curve, we want to be on the front end of the curve. We don't want to get ducks that are leaving. We want to get ducks that are arriving, because if you're shooting at them when they're leaving, they're educated ducks. They've already seen your spreads. They've already been shot at Shockey Pool. Those are the birds that are a lot harder to hunt, as we all know. We're trying to get those birds as they're arriving and haven't been in the area as long. Then the other thing that makes ducks more susceptible to harvest is obviously ice. So the more ice you have, the fewer places ducks have to go. So they're forced into areas that maybe they wouldn't otherwise use. So either, not as good a food habitat or food quality, or, they just know there's pressure there. So they're trying to avoid those areas. So icing can help duck hunters, obviously. Then the other thing is, unfortunately, not everyone has as many hours as they want to take off. So, it's important to include as many holidays so we can get youth involved, so that we can get people who can't take off days during the week involved as much as possible. And we know that's important to a lot of hunters. So I'll give you the statewide perspective. We have all this data at the zone specific. It fluctuates a little bit. There are differences between zones, but the order of these is the same in each zone, where opportunity to hunt when ducks are most important is by far and away the most important thing, followed by migration, followed by concentration. Concentration and migration, icing and migration are pretty similar. They're the two closest of any of these. And then opportunity to hunt on weekends is still important, but far less important than the other ones. We also asked how important are different species. So we had 15 species to choose from, where hunters could say, this is important to me, or this shouldn't even be considered in season setting. So most preferred, not surprising, the 4 most harvested ducks in New York State: mallards, followed by wood ducks, and then followed by black ducks and green-winged teal. There are regional differences to this. On Long Island, not surprisingly, black duck is number 1 instead of mallards. Mallards are right behind them, but black ducks are number 1. Places like the Finger Lakes and in Western New York, redheads are number 6. In a place like the Southeast zone, I think they're number 13, so way less important to hunters down there. So you have this kind of middle block of species that are important, but they're not super important to duck hunters, like blue-winged teal, widgeon, pintails. And then you have the species that are less important. And these are less important in almost all zones. The only exception here is scaup on Long Island were more important. Even in the Western zone, where scaup are harvested at a pretty good clip, they were still a lower tier species. I think they were 9th or 10th, if I'm remembering well off the top of my head. And then things like scoters, buffleheads, we know there's a lot fewer people that are out there specifically targeting those and wanting the seasons to be based around when they're migrating. So we're able to actually incorporate that into the decision process. And so what you end up with, and this is a real complex graph, so I'll try to walk you through it best I can. This blue line is taking the migration of all 15 of those species, weighting that migration by how important that species is. So mallards are driving this line a lot more than a scoter. Mallards are like 8 times more important in the western zone, in the southeast zone than scoters are. So just to give you an idea, I'm not going to get into all the math behind it, but this is kind of your aggregate duck, we'll call it. So this is all 15 of those species, but weighted based on how important they are. These gray bars show you where you have big pulses of birds. So the bigger this bar, the more birds that are species that hunters care about coming into the zone. So you can see there is always migration of some species, and that's inherently what makes season selection really hard, because it depends on where you hunt, what types of habitats you hunt, and what species you care about ultimately on what makes a good duck season. So in the southeast zone, you can see kind of how these numbers, so hunters care about high abundance. So these are the weeks with highest abundance. You will see that we miss a big jump. Like, we're acknowledging right here that yes, there are birds coming in at this point, but in order to capture all this, and the other important factor here is this line, we used weather data from each zone, 7 different weather stations to try to capture the geography. So, because we know it fluctuates a lot between the zone. And so we took the average date of when icing is likely to occur. And how we defined that was when the average low temperature stays below freezing for 5 consecutive days and doesn't come back above it. So that's what you end up with. And so anything past here, we consider these are, depending on the year, because unfortunately we can't tell what weather is going to be this year. If we could, it'd make this a heck of a lot easier. We had 2 extreme examples the last 2 years, where 2 years ago, we never got winter. It didn't come. We could have the season open until February. It never got cold. Then you got this past year where we had a pretty good clip there in late December and into January. So that's how we set duck seasons. You can see for each of the zones, we have this information right on our website, so you can go through and determine why the season dates are the season date in your specific zone. Click on the QR code there, and I'll have a QR code at the end that takes you back to this page if you don't have time to snap a picture of it right now. Those are the dates for this coming hunting season in each zone. So similar to last year, 1 day shifted essentially, 1 day earlier. All right, and then new for this year was we did this same type of a process with Canada geese. And so it's an annual decision with Canada geese because regulations change much more frequently. But same type of thing where we're asking zone-specific questions. And again, we had a lot of different alternatives for each specific zone that we considered in this decision process. So we sent it out to all HIP registrants and asked if they hunted geese. If they said they hunted geese, we asked them additional questions. We also asked about military and youth dates. So 800 of those people were not necessarily goose hunters, but they answered the other parts of the survey. So that's why there's a big difference there. And so something that's kind of interesting with geese is we know that there's a difference in goose hunters. There's people who are primarily goose hunters, and you can see it's a pretty small number. It's about 17.6% of all of our goose hunters are mostly hunting geese and will shoot ducks occasionally. Larger portion are hunting ducks primarily, but will shoot a goose if it comes through their decoys and want that opportunity. And then you have 58% that are doing both. So they're going to hunt ducks, they're going to hunt geese. It's not super surprising, but the opinions really vary between those groups. So we're going to skip ahead a little bit here and not go through the process as much as we did in the last one. So for geese, we asked about 6 different things that might be important to you. A couple of them are kind of direct opposites of one another, but same general things. Hunting when the most geese are in my area as possible, hunting when they're migrating, overlap with duck season or avoiding overlap with duck season, because it depends on what type of hunter you are. Do you want to have the most waterfowl days, or do you want to hunt when I can shoot whatever comes into my decoys? As you saw, there's people who are doing both. And then row crops are something we hear about a lot. Like, people don't want all the goose dates before the corn's been cut, because if there's no cornfields to hunt in, obviously that can really limit your hunting opportunity. And then we do ask about firearm season, but it's not in the context of we're trying to appease deer hunters. The comment that we've heard a great deal is that people lose access to cornfields and other properties when it's firearm deer season, because we have 550,000 deer hunters and we have 20,000 goose hunters. So a lot of properties and a lot of access gets closed off. So we asked about these things and asked people to tell us what's most important. So when you have a 3-bird bag limit upstate, most important thing is very clearly abundance of geese. Want to hunt when the most geese are available, followed very closely by migration, and then duck season, and then row crops. The other two things were much less important to hunters. So they were ranked either 5 or 6 pretty consistently, was the firearms overlap and the firearms deer season overlap and avoiding overlap with duck season. So most people wanted to overlap with duck season with a 3-bird bag limit. What about when you get 1? Because we know that when you get super restrictive, it may change what hunters' values are. So we asked the question directly, are your values different? So these are just people who answered that question that's different. About, I think it was 70% said that their values were not any different. But when they are different, people care most about overlapping with duck season. So duck season and when the most geese are available in a zone are the 2 most important things. Clearing away, well, not clearing away, migration is also super important, but those 3 things are clearing away the top 3 things in depending on the order, depending on what the bag limit is. So we took that information and we also asked about Long Island. I'm sorry, I wanted to separate Long Island from upstate because it's managed very differently. So hunters who said they hunted on Long Island zones, we asked them about different things. So, but same general thing. They care about migration. Number 2 was they care about overlap with duck. Number 3 was migrating, but all very similar. All 3 of these things were very similar. Row crops are less important because they know their geese don't get there until much later. So most row crops are cut at that point. Or a lot of the fields that they're hunting down there are, winter wheat and things like that. Another thing that comes up on Long Island, or another situation in their western zone, is this avoiding conflicts with other on-water recreationalists. So, we have typically avoided September seasons because of this in western Long Island. And lastly, that hunting days that overlap with duck season, so minimizing. So the opposite was least important consistently. All right. So now we'll get to the results. These are also on our website in that zone date rationales. And here you have the Northeast zone. We're just going to go through one example from each of these different kind of upstate, downstate. So in the Northeast zone, by the federal frameworks in the AP zones, we can't open them until the 4th Saturday in October. So we can't start here, even though we see the peak of migration in the Northeast zone, not surprisingly, is in the last couple of days of September into October. That's where the birds stage in the St. Lawrence River Valley. That's when the absolute peak is, and anything after that is declining in the Northeast zone as a whole. And so this dark green color is where we have chosen to start the season. So it starts the 4th Saturday in October, goes for a while, has a short split, and then opens again. And the whole thing overlaps with duck season. It has a split to allow basically a 5-day weekday split to get an extra weekend of opportunity, because we know weekends are important. And like I said, the entire season overlaps with duck season. So we have these explanations for every single zone on our website, so you can explore why your zone is the way that it's set up. You can see the data that informed it. This dashed line, just to be clear, is an estimate of corn cutting, and that's a statewide estimate. We don't have any finer resolution in corn cutting data, but essentially what this is saying, once you get to December, all the corn that's going to get cut is cut. Obviously, I'm sure you can find a field that isn't cut, but by and large, by December 1st, statewide, corn is cut, and that's data straight from the Farm Bureau. All right, we'll show you Long Island, Central Long Island now. So on Long Island, you can see this migration is much later. And all this stuff aligns with our telemetry data that we're seeing, because we have a bunch of birds of transmitters, so that's really encouraging to see. It overlaps completely with duck season and then extends a little bit longer because it's a 70-day season instead of 60 days. But as you saw earlier, it's really important to goose hunters that it overlaps with duck season. So not surprising that's when the geese are here, and that's when the duck season is open. So that's why you see, and actually we cut out this little bit of a dip where there's, for whatever reason, there's a few fewer geese in the area. And it extends into February, almost as late as it can go. If it went any later, you'd start to see more decline. So we want to avoid that tail end where we're shooting birds as they're leaving, because these birds are already, once you get into February, they're starting to migrate out of Long Island and back up along the eastern shore, up the coast. All right, so that explains how we set duck and goose seasons and all of the research we're doing. If you go to that bottom QR code, this is going to take you to those rationales that you can click on the zone that you're interested in. It'll give you an explanation. Same with duck zones, it'll give you that explanation. And then this top one takes you to the maps for our season dates. Something, just so you're aware of, that's going to be new for this year, because we know our zones are complex, we want to provide more information on zoning. So for all of our hunting season maps, we're trying to create an interactive map where you can zoom right in, you can search for your address, you can click on the map, and it'll actually tell you the season dates. And we're going to do that hopefully for all species, not just waterfowl. Is our hope is that you'll still have these static maps if you want them in the guide and a PDF form on our website. But we're trying to make it a little bit easier to zoom in and see exactly where you are, because we know it can get confusing. You hunt right here on the boundary between two different areas, or some of our goose zones don't follow WMU boundaries. It's a road demarcation, so it can get pretty confusing. So hopefully that'll help folks out in the coming year. So that is all I have. I appreciate you all sticking with me. I know that's a pretty long one, and I have not looked at any of the Q&A. Hopefully Tom has got all that wrapped up and has done a great job answering all of your questions. I'll try to jump in if there's any questions maybe I can help with if he wasn't able to. And with that, I will pass it over to Christina. You care about some of the cool land management type stuff that we're doing for waterfowl. We're doing a lot of great stuff there as well.
Oh yeah, thanks, Josh. There I am. Hi everybody. I am going to share my screen and talk a little bit about some statewide waterfowl habitat and access updates. This is mostly going to be focusing on DEC properties, but a lot of this stuff is kind of going to be applicable in many places. Some of you might know me from the Western Zone fall public webinar that we do every year. We are still going to be doing that. The format might be slightly different because we cover so many things now. But we're still going to be giving you those sort of finer scale management updates and conditions and things like that, so you can kind of prep for your season once we have a better idea of what the habitat and water conditions look like there. But I want to go over some habitat improvement projects on just a few WMAs. I kind of asked for some waterfowl enthusiasts interest areas. So what I have today, sort of a little tour down the shoreline of Lake Ontario and down into the Finger Lakes where I work. So these are all projects from the last couple of years that we've worked on with various partners. And so they have a little bit of a theme, which is mostly that the focal species group for these is waterfowl. There are benefits to many wetland-dependent species, but these, there was a lot of Ducks Unlimited involvement, Audubon New York, Audubon Great Lakes for some of them. But yeah, one of the big idea here was to make things better for waterfowl and waterfowl hunters. So many of you are probably familiar with Lakeview WMA in Jefferson County. So this is a 3,500 acre wetland complex on the eastern shore of Lake Ontario, and over the last couple of years, there has been about 180 acre restoration project in one of their, I'll say, dry cattail marshes. So this is a dense cattail stand. Also some patches of invasive common reed or Phragmites, which I'm sure you've seen around. So the idea here was to provide some more open water habitat for nesting, breeding, and migration. And so this was I don't want to call it a typical pothole and channel project, but if you've seen these marsh restoration projects where you're sort of trying to get more things wet for a longer period of time, this is kind of the traditional proven way to do it. You build in nice channels so that you get more water in different areas for longer, provides connectivity for wildlife and also recreation for paddlers, folks who want to poke into the cattails and hunt or just look at birds, wetland dependent mammals, all sorts of critters. Yeah, so what you end up with after you fix up your sort of dry, monotonous cattail marsh is this nice grouping of potholes and channels. So here you can see this was not too long after the project finished. There's still some tracks visible from where the giant equipment came in to do this work. Those sort of mounds are a little bit darker brown, but really this is a large area, and now a lot more of it is hydrologically connected to the lake and provides better habitat, more varied structure, and just more area for those wetland dependent species. And so this was a recent project, and so I think they have another about 150 acres planned next door, basically, to this. I haven't visited it since it was completed, but looks great in photos. The land managers are happy with it. And so it'll be great to see how they can expand on this and sort of how it matures over time. Next up is Upper and Lower Lakes WMA in St. Lawrence County. So this is a big, I think mostly one piece property. It's more than 8,000 acres, almost 9,000, and almost half of that is wetland habitat. And the main part of this is a 2,500 acre impounded wetland and open water unit, which is really just massive. And to manage the water in this massive impoundment, you need a series of water control structures. And so I'll show you a photo, I think in the next slide, of these just giant culvert pipes that have some like stop log structures essentially within them. And but these were built a long time ago. And so the aging infrastructure has made it harder to move or maintain water as it's needed over the year. Basically, you've got leaks. It's really hard to adjust your water level. And so you lose that control over the marsh cycle and what you would want to see to make the best habitat possible for these wetland dependent species, including a lot of waterfowl. So this restoration project involved replacement of damaged and obsolete components, essentially rebuilding the stop log structure. And this is just a photo or an aerial photo of the WMA. So you can see this huge watershed area that is basically controlled by one, looks like a little outlet, but actually it's these like giant battery of water control structures. Not something you super want to climb into. We have smaller ones in Montezuma, and I try not to do that. But as you can see from the ladder, you got to do it sometimes. You got to clean them out. Or in this case, you need to rebuild them completely. But this will just make a huge difference in how well the wetland and the open water here can be managed. Finally, moving to where I come from, Northern Montezuma WMA. We've had a handful of restoration enhancement projects in the last couple of years. We have about 8,000 acres north of Cayuga Lake along the Seneca River. We also have a bunch of dry cattail marshes and Phragmites problems. This is mostly the case because the Seneca River level dropped when the canal was built, and then farmers took advantage of this and sort of bermed up that really nice fertile farmland along the river. And so sort of in the time in between, DEC purchased a bunch of those properties, and of course also the Fish and Wildlife Service a little bit south of us for the Montezuma Refuge. And so over time, we've been working with partners to try and reconnect some of that floodplain to the river, or also just improving our infrastructure for managing water in those impoundments. So recent projects here have involved, again, reconnecting marshes to the floodplain. We've had, as you can see here, some floodplain pothole and channel construction. Those were finished a couple of years ago. They're filling in properly with vegetation, kind of waiting for muskrat to move in and start adding some variety in there. And then last year we did some work with New York State Canal Corp for some larger scale scrapes and habitat mounds. The idea is really to improve the topography, well, both in the floodplain and within some older impoundments that needed, you know, a little bit of love, a little bit of adjustment. And so we were able to do that. Another important component in basically all of these projects is invasive vegetation control. The idea is that we're going to be able to adjust the hydrology, and so native plants will have a better chance at succeeding and proliferating and feeding wildlife. But sometimes you need to actively go in and remove the invasive vegetation that's already there to sort of give them a chance. Just a couple views. Scale of this photo is not great to show how massive some of the equipment going into these units to do this work is. And then on the right is just a view of the Seneca River floodplain near our office, and you can see some of those shallow water areas that will fill in with some native veg. We did a lot of seeding and plug planting there. And birds are using it. A lot of loafing areas for ducks and geese, and shorebirds were loving the mud, especially the last fall and even spring now. We had a few questions sort of about habitat management for waterfowl in general, and I'm going to super briefly touch on that, just sort of what we do day to day. This could easily be its own hour-and-a-half long presentation. But for now, a lot of what we do and most of what we need to do is just water level management and encouraging those native plants. So when we have the ability to manage wetlands, like in an impoundment with a working water control structure, you can run these units through something called the marsh cycle. Basically, you can go from having a big open water pond to really thick filled in cattail by keeping the water lower. And then you can raise the water back up again, let some muskrats move in, chew up all the cattail, get some more natural potholes, and leave room for really high food value annual plants to grow when the water gets low again. So if you're really clever and good at planning and the weather plays along, you can hold these impoundments in just a place where they're really good, both duck food production, not so much nesting habitat, at least where we are, but you get a lot of migration, cover, and resting areas and all that good stuff. But you know, these are dynamic systems, and so they you have to adapt to different weather patterns. A berm blows out, and then that's kind of your whole year, things like that. So those are some of the things that we try to do year to year, get a handle on it, but sometimes you really need to adjust for what's happening that year. So, but we try really hard to have huntable water in our impoundments when it gets to, you know, hunting season. Related to that, we do a lot of encouragement of native plants. This is not just high food value plants, but also cover, things that birds look for when they're looking for safe places to be. Nice thing about birds is they can move around. And so not everything has to, you know, cover all activities, I guess, in one place. They can move around a bit. Things we do to encourage native plants, again, we can cut, we mow, we disc, we can pull invasives, we can also spray it where appropriate. And when we're working at really large scales like we are on like the properties that I mentioned earlier, we end up doing a lot of spraying sometimes. We also can plant native seeds. A lot of our properties have healthy seed banks. Sometimes they're buried under invasive Phragmites, and they just need, you know, the chance to sprout, get some sun. But sometimes you want to reset stuff. You want specific plant species in restoration areas, and then we can plant them. Smaller strategies that we do on some WMAs. Some of them do have some level of agriculture agreements, and so that can be farmers planting soybean or corn in really specific places. We do it quite a bit for upland units that we're not ready to restore, but they still provide, farmers need to leave a certain amount of standing crop, and so they do provide a food resource. It helps to keep those invasive species from moving in, and some folks really appreciate sort of the traditional, more farm land type hunting opportunities. So we can provide some of that. Another sort of strategy for managing for waterfowl on our properties is refuge areas. The idea is that during the hunting season, you have marshes or ponds or other units that are not open to hunting, and so the birds that are getting blown out of every other unit in the area have a place that they learn is safe to be, and so that just keeps them tied to a spot for longer. And you know, they still go out to those other places where they can be hunted, and they stick around for longer. Just say we have some of them in Region 8, not at Northern Montezuma, but we've got a lot of other stuff going on. It's refuge areas are great. They just take a lot of planning to do right, and you know, not make folks mad when they're used to hunting in certain places. Everybody loves the best marshes, and so do the ducks. They'd love to be there. So those are just yeah, some of the things we do to manage for waterfowl, and this slide is just to show some of the different scale of work that we do. So it can range from going out with, you know, 10 or 20 volunteers to hand pull water chestnut, which can really choke out both river and stream and impounded marshes, to like drone spraying of Phragmites, where you can cover more than 100 acres in a day. So yeah, we deal with a lot of different situations, and we try and pick the right tools for making that habitat better. And taking a step even further back of protecting waterfowl habitat in New York State, some of this is even outside the Bureau of Wildlife. Other things going on at DEC or with DEC provided funds. So we protect a lot of habitat by acquiring it. So I don't want to say we're always looking for property to buy, but kind of. We always have irons in the fire, looking for places where it makes sense to sort of like protect new habitat, whether it's already good habitat or things that could be restored, places that are going to provide access for hunters and other users where that currently doesn't exist, and also to sort of consolidate, like fill in the spaces between, say, WMA units. DEC also provides competitive grants for land trusts for conservation easements, and that can be huge. That protects habitat on private property. And some of them have different rules associated with them, but generally that's sort of what those grants are for. New York State's open space plan is currently being updated, and protecting wildlife habitat is going to be a significant part of that. You may have heard about the updated freshwater wetland regulations. There's an improved mapping system. Some of the acreage limits thresholds are going to be changed, and those provide in New York State freshwater wetland regulations, both protection of wetlands and adjacent areas, which are very important for both water quality, habitat quality, and that's, you know, where a lot of the breeding habitat is. And last one that I wanted to mention, if we have any folks involved with nonprofits, land trusts, things like that, the WQIP Water Quality Improvement Project grant from our Division of Water, those now include fish and wildlife habitat improvement. So that's new, I think, last year. And I can tell you that they are looking for fish and wildlife habitat improvement projects. So just something to think about if you're involved with that. And of course, all of the work that I just talked about really would not be possible without our partners. This is just a handful of who we have worked with in the last few years. And especially for those restoration projects that I mentioned, Fish and Wildlife Service, Ducks Unlimited, and the Great Lakes Commission. Those were really important for pulling those off. So really quick, I'm going to talk a little bit more about access improvements and some mentored hunt information. So a big one for what we've been working on the last couple of years is Hunt Fish New York events. We get a lot of inquiries about things that people can do. They just kind of don't know where to start, how to meet mentors or join clubs, even though, you know, a lot of folks have, or chapters of clubs have web pages, but they're in many different places. It can help to have a centralized place for it. So DEC has developed sort of a one-stop shop for organized hunts, skill building opportunities, and even just some more social events. And that's the Huntfish NY events page. So instructors and partners can list their upcoming event on Huntfish NY, and that is sort of a landing page for information, and it's a centralized place for signups. So you can get updates when people sign up for your event, and folks will submit the information that you want when they sign up. And so you do have, you know, control over what is presented and sort of who can sign up, the information that you get, but you've got some help and like a central hub for people to look for it. And these include things like mentored hunts, fishing clinics, cleanups, and even just social events. Oh, click in here. This is what the Huntfish New York sort of event page looks like. There's a map at the bottom too. It looks, as you probably noticed, a lot like the Hunter Ed class page, and sort of built similarly. But it helps to have sort of one platform that people are familiar with that they can use, and you can get support for throwing these events. And I know this is a waterfowl talk, but I want to give a quick shout out to mentored pheasant hunts. This is something that DEC expanded last year, and so we're hoping that we continue to expand it this year. And, you know, we're all waterfowl hunters, but maybe you like to go out and hunt pheasant every once in a while. So DEC reserves 6,000 stocked pheasants for mentored hunts each year. Clubs and other organizations can register their event. As I mentioned, have those signups managed on that webpage. And DEC will provide up to 2 pheasants per participant for the event. So you don't have to, you know, compete with other hunters if you're holding your event on private land, or you know, worry about the stock that you already have in a stocked place. So DEC has these birds basically reserved to encourage mentored hunts. There is an application on the website, which is not currently active, but it will be later this year. So keep an eye out if you're looking to plan an event. And Josh mentioned waterfowl ID courses, but I stopped down the hall to talk to our Hunter Ed biologist to see what other new things might be up in the world of waterfowl ID courses. So we do occasionally have online courses available, trying to make those, trying to have more of those. And keep an eye out if you're trying to take an ID course, especially starting in July. That's when they really start popping up. They fill up extremely quickly though. And make a pitch, since you're here and interested in waterfowl and maybe interested in mentoring. Maybe you're also interested in becoming a waterfowl ID course instructor. So we're always looking for more of them. It's a fun class, a little bit different flavor than the hunting, the regular hunter and trapper classes. And now is a great time to be involved because new instructor classes are happening soon, no matter what region you are in. So if you think you might be interested in hearing about that, contact your local DEC Hunter Education office. And Frank Phillips here in Region 8 is also covering Region 9 right now, and he just offered to let anybody know where they can find more info if you email him at that address below. So, last thing, yep, we're working on some improved maps and web pages. You'll be able to pull things up right on your phone, know exactly where you are, what public lands that are great for waterfowl hunting are available around you, and where you are and what the bag limit is, which is just great. So stay tuned for that. And I think that is all I have. Yep, if you have, see if we have time for questions. But that Hunt Fish New York events page is available at this, the QR code right here. So that is all I've got. Thank you.
Great job, Christina. So we have gotten an incredible number of questions. Really appreciate everyone's interest. It's really great to see all the questions. There are a couple we haven't answered. We're limited to the number of characters we can use, so some of these are probably better off to just tackle them. So we'll verbally. So I'll go through a couple that came in while I was presenting. I mean, we got over 85 questions, so this is all great. If we don't get to your question or you feel like we didn't answer it, feel free to send us an email at wildlife, right there on the screen. Feel free to shoot us an email and ask us additional questions. We answered a lot of questions. Hopefully we got to yours, but right now I'll just go through a couple other ones that came in that while I was going. So let's see. A couple questions about the September season. So that's a good question. I did not show that graphic. I showed it in the fall, but we know that we occasionally shoot AP geese during our September season. But so we ban 3,000 to 5,000 of them a year, and less than 3% of the overall AP harvest. So those migratory geese that get shot in New York happen during the September season. 97% of our harvest happens during the regular season. So those late October through January seasons in upstate New York, that's when we're shooting AP geese. If you get a strong north wind on September 22nd, absolutely no doubt there are some migratory geese here, but it's a very small number. Your opportunity to shoot them is a couple of days if that were to happen. And it's something that we're gonna we're constantly open to revisiting. We're gonna look at the data and see where that leads us. Like I said, we have a postdoc who's gonna be coming on and be doing a lot of this analysis. And if it warrants some change, whether that just means being a little bit more restrictive with our bag limit late in the season or whatever that may be. There's a lot of different ways we can address it to ensure we're not having adverse impact. But again, 3% of our total 100%, so 97% of our harvest of migratory geese is happening during the regular season. So not zero, but it's a very small percentage of our harvest. A number of questions about the survey. Yeah, we're always open to wordsmithing. If you feel like some things were confusing, we're happy to kind of, this is an iterative process. There's no process that's going to be perfect. We're looking to make it better. If things were confusing, I mean, I think there's already ideas we have on how we can make the goose season survey a little bit clearer on what exactly we're asking. But I will say that all of the results we got from those are right in line with, I think, what you by and large expect. Like, for duck hunting, we know what species are important. We know mallards are super important. We know black ducks and green-winged teal and wood ducks. We know those are the most important species. So when it comes out on top, it makes us confident that people understood the question. So that's always encouraging. And like I said, those kind of zone-specific high priority species, those all came out in the data. Redheads were way more important in Western New York than they were in the Southeast and Northeast, as you would expect. Scaup, more important on Long Island. Like, those things all really line up. So that's all good news. We got some questions on the military days. As you saw, I had a lot of content to cover, so I apologize. I didn't get to how we chose those military days. So we asked questions of hunters who were eligible to participate or mentored somebody, their values on that. And some of the things that they wanted consecutive days. There's a very strong opinion that they wanted the days to be consecutive. And in most zones, except for the Western zone, they wanted it to be prior to the hunting season by more than 2 weeks. So that's why we ended up with what we did. We'll still be, we'll probably do some outreach actually in the coming year to some, especially for the military days, which I think are a little bit more challenging. You're dealing with very different group of people than youth hunters, so we want to do some outreach to some military groups, like hunter groups, to try to get a little bit more input, because it's hard to find those people. It's not a huge population of people that we're surveying. So unlike youth hunters, where we have a lot of youth hunters and we have a lot of people who mentor youth, we have a little bit smaller population there. So we're going to continue to do outreach there. Let me see, what other ones did I miss? Questions about why do the seasons overlap? And the simple answer is that a lot of those early migrating species are very consistent on when they move into New York State. And they're in New York State in the northern zone the same time that they're in the western zone and the southeast zone. And when we made those decisions, the whole point in zoning is to make dates that fit the duck migration in each of those zones. It's not to create 5 different openers. If it was, every state would have 5 zones. It's because we have very diverse habitats in New York, so we set duck seasons by zone. And so they happen to overlap. We didn't force them to not overlap, because that would be a disservice to the person who only hunts the northeast zone. Why would we, we wouldn't choose dates that fit the data worse, just so that the western zone doesn't overlap with it. So there's a lot of pluses or minuses to it. I mean, you could look at it from one way, is that hunters are going to be more spread out on opening day, because you can only go one place in a day. You can't be going to the northeast opener and the southeast opener the same day. But we realize some people value that zone hopping. You still zone hop, it's just going to be different dates. There's second openers for a lot of different seasons. So there still is opportunities, a lot of difference between those seasons. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of dates that don't align. So there's still a lot of value squeezed out. And we basically have a duck season open from the 11th of October through to the last week of January every year. So a lot of opportunity in New York State to zone hop and to go other places. And we have the luxury of having 5 different zones, which no other, it's the most zones of any state, even huge states like Alaska and California. We have the most zones, so a lot of opportunity. Let's see. Will the Northeast zone ever see a later season? So this year, actually, or this past year, was the latest season it's seen by more than a week. It has a gap in early December and goes till late. There's that 1 week opportunity. I understand if you live on the St. Lawrence, it can be hard sometimes, because your opportunities on the river itself, especially, are later once everything else freezes. But the reason it's better later is because all of the other places are frozen. And so there's very, very limited opportunity outside of those areas, those few areas that aren't frozen. So, they're definitely, you did see a later shift. So they are getting more opportunity later. But the reality is, in the Northeast zone, you don't have a lot of late season opportunity, except for a very few limited places. All right, one last one, and then I'm going to kick it over to Christina to answer a few last questions, and then we'll wrap it up here. Really appreciate everyone's engagement. This is really great. We got 90 questions. That's fantastic. There's a question about mergansers and why can't you eat mergansers? Why can't you eat? I'm sorry, said that wrong. Why are they not part of our regular bag? And really, the reason why they're not part of our bag is what you saw earlier on contaminant loads. We have a do not eat health advisory on them from the Department of Health, and they're very high in mercury. And so we made the decision that, there's a lot of different reasons to harvest animals. There's a lot of legitimate uses, but right now you can shoot 6 common mergansers if you want to in a day, and it'll be part of your duck bag. We don't want to be encouraging wanton waste. It's a bad look for all hunters, because trust me, we get the calls every year when someone dumps some long-tailed ducks or some mergansers off the side of the road. So, we just want to be responsible, and quite honestly, that's just the decision that was made good, I think, about almost 20 years ago now, and that's how it's going to continue for the foreseeable future for that reason. So that is why. So now I will hand it over to Christina. And again, we didn't get to your question. Feel free to email that email address.
Yeah, I've got at least a couple here that I can answer. Has the Lakeview project resulted in improved hunting? I do not know because it was recently completed. So it looks like it should certainly have improved access, but I don't know. Sometimes those like fresh potholes don't always get the duck or waterfowl use right away. They might be attractive as loafing areas early on, but generally for a little while until they start filling in with veg and inverts and things like that, ducks don't really spend time there to feed. So with any of these pothole and channel projects, it can take a couple years for those to kind of mature and really be, good, attractive habitat. I know that the last one we had at Montezuma, people were goose hunting in them, which we don't do a lot of at that property. But yeah, they were ducks or geese took to them right away. But yeah, Lakeview, I am not so sure about. Let's see, is New York looking at projects to improve nesting rates and hatch success rates, such as hen houses and predator control programs in the improved wetland areas? So we do not have the staff time or funding really or staff period to do a lot of those things on our managed wetlands, unfortunately. I know that sort of recently, Delta has been out in Western New York doing some of that work, and some other groups do more organized predator control programs. So how possible it is to do those is going to vary by the property and sort of the managers potentially. We don't have like, a sort of central plan for that sort of thing, but it is possible to set up something called a volunteer stewardship agreement. And so depending on exactly who was involved and what the plan was, we could potentially have basically volunteers come out and do that in a semi-organized way. The biggest challenge, especially with things like hen houses, is and wood duck box maintenance and things like that, is we have folks come in with great ideas and they do it for a few years, and then the champions of whatever group were doing it sort of they move or they age out, and things sort of fall down everybody's ladder. And so we would love for more of that. I'll speak for myself. For more folks to get involved with that sort of thing, because we can't do as much as we would like to do ourselves. So yes, New York would love to do more of that. We're just probably not going to be able to do it ourselves. Let's see, I sent out the WQIP grant link, and let's see. Is there any plan to improve waterfowl habitat on additional New York State DEC land, such as creating dams or berms to back up water on state forests or WMAs? We do have plans for just generally more habitat improvement work. I didn't want to talk very much about future plans just because a lot of funding and even things for our partners kind of need to settle. A lot of things come from the federal level. Not everything like WQIP is a state grant, or ultimately state funded grant. So yes, we are always looking at projects to do, getting into NACA maybe for next year as well, working on the last NACA's planning, that kind of thing. I'll just, without getting too far in the weeds, it can be really, really difficult to build new dams or berms in places, especially along rivers. Like I deal with the Seneca River, just because it makes the flood engineers really nervous. You need to prove a lot of things that show that flooding will not be worsened like anywhere when you build these berms, and we have a lot of reasoning to why they won't, but it takes a lot of work, a lot of engineering and math and reports for us to essentially build new impoundments. We'd like to do a couple of them, even just on our own properties, but yeah, it's a very complicated process. So yeah. I think that's what I've got for, yep, for this set of questions.
All right, one last question I think we got a question about PR dollars. And so Pittman Robinson, if folks don't know what that means, that is the excise tax on firearms that then goes to states for wildlife management. And so the exact proportion of that goes to waterfowl hunting and conservation, I don't know, but I am constantly reminded that we're doing a lot of research and a lot of funding goes to us right now. We have really expensive monitoring programs that are shared between the state and our federal partners and Canadian partners. So we put an incredible amount of work and finances towards waterfowl management. It's a really impressive system that involves just a huge number of people and a huge number of agencies to make it all work. So yeah, there's a huge amount of money that's put into both habitat management and the actual species management or harvest management in addition to that. I mean, all of those projects that I was talking to are huge projects with a lot of resources behind them, both in terms of staff and the actual equipment that's used in them. So it's a really huge effort. All right. Well, really appreciate everyone's time and all of the questions. And again, sorry if we didn't get to your question. Like I said, we're up to almost 100 questions. So we probably did not get to every single one. It's a little bit hard to follow. So feel free to follow up in that email, and really appreciate your time and hope you come back and join us again next spring when we host this same webinar. So have a great night. Thanks, everybody.